Hello and welcome to my Action Research virtual poster presentation. My name is Jacqueline Manti. From my experiences, a lack of student motivation in the classroom continues to be an issue in education. Using a problem-based approach that incorporates collaboration and open-ended responses might be an effective strategy to engage students and allow for effective learning. My research problem. My action research investigates the problem of lack of student motivation in the classroom. I want to explore the impact of problem-based learning on student motivation and achievement in the classroom. It's an important problem to examine due to the issue of student motivation in the classroom regarding math and science. Not all students are motivated to learn all of what's necessary by curriculum using teacher-centered learning approach. In my practice, I've noticed that when a student is motivated by a task and can take ownership of their learning, their success levels are higher. My core values as an educator are that learning should be achieved by all. Therefore, researching different types of teaching methods is necessary in order to provide an approach to learning that's inclusive and engaging to all. My research question is, how will the implementation of a problem-based approach in junior classrooms impact student achievement and motivation in mathematics and science? Some central terms: problem-based learning, also known as PBL, is a critical thinking approach to learning in which students work collaboratively in small groups to solve a complex real-world problem that requires the development and use of a variety of skills and knowledge from different subject areas, with the teacher acting as a facilitator. Inclusion is being universally accepted and embracing all learners with the promotion of equal opportunity. Student achievement is the student's accomplishments in mastering knowledge and skills, having good character, and producing high-quality work. Teacher-centered learning is all attention is on the teacher. It's usually in the form of a lecture, and collaboration is not used frequently. I conducted a literature review. My first literature source was Problem-Based Learning in Mathematics. It was a research monograph that reflected the success of problem-based learning for students in regards to their conceptual understanding of mathematics. It connected to my research as it questions what type of impact problem-based learning has on achievement in science and math. The authors note that the research and case studies reflect that students are engaged and motivated in this approach, and that traditional teaching alone doesn't always support students in applying math in a variety of contexts. Problem-based learning engages students in the concept and the context. This may be a reason for the lack of motivation in traditional forms of math teaching. If students don't feel what they're learning to be meaningful and has real-life applicability, then they may be less motivated to master it. The author also notes the teacher's comfort level in the approach, and that might be a potential gap in the research. If teachers aren't providing valid problem-based learning in their classrooms due to their ability, what they know about problem-based learning, their comfort level, then students may not receive the benefits approach, and that can impact findings of student achievement through problem-based learning. My second source, Engaged Learning: Impacts of PBL and PJBL with Elementary and Middle Grade Students, was a research article that gathered qualitative data on the impacts of problem-based learning for students in the elementary and junior grades. The researchers ensured that teachers were trained similarly in this approach so they all had the same understanding of problem-based learning, and then they gathered data on their experiences putting this approach in their class through online surveys, phone interviews, and observations. It connected to my research by showing how students were positively impacted in their learning behaviors, their learning attitudes, and how their learning preferences reflected elements of PBL. These included a more positive approach to learning, an improved academic mindset, a motivation to learn, a perseverance in their studies, and the development of flexible thinking. Students preferred this learning style due to the autonomy they had as well as the opportunity to collaborate. This provides insight into a high level of student engagement when problem-based learning is implemented. The gaps in this research is that the data was gathered from the teacher perspective, so not the student perspective. However, the article did show a change in students in regards to the depth of their learning and in the gaining of new skills and attitudes. This does show that students are impacted positively when PBL is implemented, despite not providing a record of student achievement. My final source, Problem-Based Learning in K-8 Mathematics and Science, was a literature review. It examined 9 research studies that significantly showed that students' conceptual development, so both the knowledge and then the application of that knowledge, improved with this approach, as well as their knowledge retention and attitudes towards science. It supported my research regarding the question of impact from problem-based learning by showing the impact on student achievement is positive when problem-based learning is used to teach science. However, the research also did indicate a gap in the definition of problem-based learning. So that might mean that not all problem-based learning in classrooms would look the same, and that could impact the results of student achievement. So this research does push for a more detailed and agreed upon approach so that educators can check what they're doing against that definition to ensure that they're facilitating it correctly. The findings from this article indicate the need for more research regarding problem-based learning, but that the research that currently does exist reflects positively on problem-based learning as an effective approach for science instruction. To summarize all 3 of these articles and the impact that they had, it really did show that it supported my research into the impact of problem-based learning on student achievement by showing that the positive impacts on learning attitudes, learning behaviors, and academic mindsets. They highlighted the changes in both performance and outlook on learning in the students who participated in the problem-based learning, while also emphasizing the need for teacher training and a shared, clear definition of problem-based learning for educators. It reflects a need in my research now to examine how problem-based learning is currently implemented, and from those approaches, what's really working and what's not. All authors also drew on the origins of problem-based learning being used for medical students, recognizing that knowledge needs to be applied for students to be successful in the retention of it. As reflected in the articles, the impacts of problem-based learning in classrooms may be understood only by teacher and student reported changes, just because standardized testing or standardized evaluation isn't typically used in a problem-based learning approach. So that might be a potential gap in their research. So what we might see is more qualitative impacts of problem-based learning and qualitative findings, such as questionnaires and teacher-conducted interviews. The literature reviewed informs my research by noting positive impacts of problem-based learning, as well as the need for more resources for this learning approach. My research action plan. So I will use 3 sources of data. Observation videos first, and I selected it because I could capture the conversations and processes of problem-based learning in the classroom so that both reflect student achievement and motivation. I'll capture 2 videos of each group working through 2 different problem-based learning events over the course of the research period, identifying how engaged students are by their contributions to the group, such as their questions, answers, and their attempts. I selected it because I can review it later and then maintain student-centered learning by not interrupting students while they're learning with my own questions. I also use student work samples so I can track their achievement over time by targeting students who are at diverse learning levels, so a student who's at a level 2, level 3, level 4, and determine whether student achievement was improved, stayed the same, or became worse. For student journals, I chose this source because it's a first-hand account of student motivation. It's not what I interpret, it's what students are telling me. I'll have students reflect on their feelings and their attitudes towards their problem-based activities in order to understand how motivated and engaged they feel towards the work that they're doing. To ensure validity and reliability, I employed techniques that were both quantitative, like our student work samples, and qualitative, like student journals and video observation. I chose to use videos to collect my observations for student motivation with a focused set of look-fors, like student questioning, student answering, and student attempts, multiple times for each student to ensure that my tool is reliable. It's taken by video, so I can't just interpret it in quick note-taking. I have to look for the frequencies of the look-fors. I'm also using student work samples. I'll make sure it's reliable and valid because I'm going to be scoring it with the same rubric over time for students at multiple learning levels to really determine if there is an improvement in student achievement. Finally, collecting student journals is first-hand evidence of student motivation because it's not by teacher interpretation. It's directly addressed by students themselves, making the tool a valid measure of motivation. Collecting them on a weekly basis and then assessing the data at the end will help me understand how often students felt motivated by problem-based learning and how many students felt motivated. And that will determine if motivation levels increased, decreased, or did not show any significant changes. My participants will be my classroom of 30 students and the classroom teacher, as well as a colleague who can ensure validity and reliability of my interpretations. Data will be collected in the classroom only when the classroom teacher / researcher is present using the methods described. Some ethical considerations. I do need to receive written consent from each student's parents that they are allowed to partake in the research project and be filmed. I need to make sure that the names of students are not shared, especially for their journals and work samples, by removing their names and using pseudonyms. I need to receive consent from students to be filmed and to analyze their work in relation to the project. And I'll keep all data locked in file cabinets to which only I have a key, and immediately delete the video from the device after it's uploaded to a password-protected folder. My timeline. So for observation videos, I'll record them twice on two separate occasions for each student over the course of 8 weeks. I chose this because I didn't want to record one student one time, because that they could be having a bad day that day, not wanting to participate. But if I record them twice, that shows me 2 different occasions, which will provide me more data on their true feelings towards problem-based learning. Also, having student work samples collected from 3 students who are at a variety of levels every single week for 8 weeks. My student journals, I'll have a weekly collection of those for 8 weeks as well. My data analysis. So for observation videos, I will analyze them by watching 2 different videos of each group working through a problem in order to understand how engaged the group members are. I'll analyze this data in a quantitative way by documenting the frequency each member contributes. So that would be having them ask questions, attempting to solve the problem, offering suggestions or alternatives. So I'm not assessing them on their right answers, but their engagement in the process. And then I'll find the median score of typical student engagement from the frequencies. For student work samples, I'll analyze the work of students who typically achieve a certain level. So one student who typically gets level 2, another who gets level 3, another who typically gets level 4 on most of their work. Using the same scoring rubric weekly over the course of the research period, I'll identify any trends in student achievement. So if they're improving, staying the same, lower than typical achievement, by finding the median for their overall achievement level after all of the data is collected. For student journals, I'll use a coding method. So they will reflect weekly on their engagement with the problem-based lessons by being provided with the same prompting questions over the course of the 8 weeks. I'll document frequencies in certain responses, like if they're not engaged, if they are engaged, motivated, unmotivated, if they're feeling challenged, if things are too easy, in order to measure student attitude and motivation towards their work. This action and research study would really support my knowledge of how the method we choose for instruction must be engaging and motivating in order for students to truly absorb and be able to apply their knowledge. From my experiences, I always found that students who were applying what they were learning in a meaningful way that felt meaningful to them always did better. By examining the impact of problem-based learning on student motivation and achievement, I could either continue using or cease using this instructional approach. And connecting the research will provide me with a quantitative understanding of whether it's really beneficial for my students, instead of just applying my own opinion based on what I see for a couple days in a week. If this research finds a positive impact on student motivation and achievement, it would influence my practice by creating more student-centered opportunities in the classroom, as well as accounting for student motivation and planning. Instead of delivering knowledge and assigning projects, it would really challenge me as an educator to find opportunities where my students could practice what they learned in a real and meaningful way, using real-world problems, while also gathering new knowledge and skill. My role as a teacher would shift from the instructor, an expert, and move into the facilitator and the learner alongside my students. Thank you for partaking in my research virtual poster presentation.